And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's fashion, Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And now, here's Ted.
Okay, Becky, thanks very much. Welcome to another edition of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for all your comments that you've shared with us on our website. You can do so by going to www.tedwallachin.com and sign up, and it's all free, and your comments and thoughts are always welcome. This week, our special guest is host of Canada Now with Jeff Sammut, which is heard weekdays from 1 to 3 Eastern on Sirius XM Channel 167. And you can hear his weekly podcast titled Remembering. It is a unique offering dedicated to who and what we have memories of. Welcome, Jeff Sammut. It's good to see you, Jeff. How you been?
Oh man, I've been I'm better today for getting to speak with you, Ted. It's been years since we've spoken, and even longer since we've seen each other. I'm so flattered that you've asked me to be on the show.
Yeah, well, it's my honor, really. You're right. We worked together, I don't know, 20 years ago or something like that.
I would fill in for Nick Majorano, who was your technical director at the time.
Yeah.
And I'd fill in, and I just had a blast every time working with you on the morning show over at 1010 in Toronto. And if I may, I've talked about this on the air before. I think I was filling in at 1010 a few years ago, and I mentioned this. You had come on with us. I don't know why, but you had come on with us.
I don't know why either.
I don't know why.
Obviously, the shortage of guests.
Yeah. No, there was a reason for it. But I wanted to say this. Now, I've always held you in a very high regard as a broadcaster, but as a person, here is why. The broadcasting, that is self-explanatory. But as a person, I'll explain why. Because I remember years ago, I was working evenings. I was a technical director in the evenings, and my dog had passed away. I don't know if this will ring a bell, but my dog passed away, and it was during the day, and I had already arrived at work, got a phone call, your dog passed away. I went home, took care of things there, and I came back into work. And in the first hour of the evening show that Mike Stafford at the time was hosting it, I had gone on with him, and we had talked about losing a pet. And I had talked about what it was like that day to lose my pet. And you called in about halfway through the show, not to be on the air, but you called the private line, and you called to talk to me, and you said, good for you on doing that. And you said a lot of nice things to me that day. And it really, on a day that I really needed it, Ted, it meant so much to me. So thanks for doing that.
Well, you know what? I've been a pet owner my entire life, and if for those people who've never owned a dog or a cat, you don't know what it's like losing them. It's like losing a member of your family. It literally is. And I remember when our family dog died. I was writing for the Sun at the time, and I remember talking to the late Christy Blatchford, because she had written an article about when her dog died. And I said to her, not that I want to copy or anything, but I just lost my dog, and I want to write an article about it. And she said, I'm sorry to hear that. And she looked at me and she said, good luck.
Yeah.
And I never did, because I sat down and started to write it, and I went, forget it. Yeah. I can't do this.
Yeah. It's
really I can't
hard.
do this.
Yeah. Well, it was tough to go on the air and talk about it, but luckily I wasn't hosting. I was, Mike, as the host, was carrying the mail, and I would just jump in and, told my story at the beginning, and then people called in, and I jumped in every once in a while. But it just meant a lot that you called in and said good on you for that, because I was early on in my career as well, and to get a call from you really meant a lot. So I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I want to talk about your career. How did you make your way to Sirius XM?
Oh, wow. It feels like a long journey there. I think I was about 20 years into radio before I made it to Sirius XM, but pamphlet version, went to Humber College for radio, and before graduating, I got a job at a sports radio station in Toronto and worked there for a couple of years, then found my way over to your channel at the time, 1010, and that's where I got an opportunity to meet with you and work with you a little bit, filling in, of course. And then I went back to the sports radio station, and I was there for a good 16 years or so, something like that. And my time came to an end there, and ping-ponged back to 1010, but this time as a host, and dabbled there for a little while before Sirius XM came calling with an opportunity to host a show there. And it's been great because it was the first time for me that on a consistent basis you can host a show on a national stage, across Canada and the US, and that affords you the opportunity to speak with all kinds of
Yeah.
different people. I don't care about the profile. It doesn't matter to me. Nobody knows who I am. It's all about the guests and who you're talking to. And it's afforded me so many wonderful opportunities to meet some incredible people.
For people who don't know what Canada Now is all about, tell them what that 2-hour daily experience is like.
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, and really, I'm fortunate enough that SiriusXM just kind of allows me to do what they do within the parameters of what they had originally thought. And I think the show has kind of broadened in that it was kind of a check around Canada and talking about different stories around Canada, some lighthearted, some serious. And I think it's kind of developed more with my prompting. And also, I think what's most enjoyable when listening to radio, as far as I'm concerned, is listening to deep and meaningful conversations. So, I think what went from a mixed bag show where we talked about a business thing and a sports thing and a political thing, what have you, and let's go to this small town and talk about what they're doing there, has turned into a little bit of that, but also longer form conversations with a wide variety of people, be it actors or musicians or directors, filmmakers, authors, what have you. And it's been great. I
Mhm.
really, really enjoy, and I have some regulars and I have some people that might pop in for about 10, 15 minutes or so, and we'll talk about something specific in the tech world or on sports or whatever.
Right.
And I enjoy those, but I really get a lot out of those, 20 to 30-minute conversations, even longer than that, if they can be, with, people that have lived maybe a bit of a different life than we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah.
But now, just for the record, we should let people know that we're recording this on Friday, October the 20th, just several days after the passing of Suzanne Summers, tragically, just a day before her 77th birthday as well. You, on this day on your program, repeated a conversation that you had with her and her husband, Alan Hamill.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh, it was great. I mean, and that was, I'd say, about a year or two into my time at Sirius XM. So I, I think, I mean, I went back and listened to it, and I partly listened to how I was, and I went, oh, I wasn't as bad as I thought. I'm pretty hard on myself. But I was a little bit nervous because, I'd grown up watching Suzanne Summers and loved her on Three's Company and other stuff that she had done. And, she was more than that. She was this icon in fitness and in health and everything. She had just turned herself into a massive entrepreneur and a household name. And
Hmm.
so when she came in, and she happens to be married to Alan Hamill, I mean, a Canadian who has certainly made it and had a great talk show back in the day. And the two of them came in together. And I'll tell you, for a person, albeit 20 some odd years into their radio career, but only a few years into hosting, I don't think they did it on purpose. I think it was just with their being. They put me right at ease because they were very conversational. It felt like they were a couple of people that lived up the street, and they just happened to be super famous. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you something about them, Ted, and you don't always see this. You've talked to more people than I have of bigger profile too. They had a lineup out
Yeah.
the door and to the elevator of people that worked in the building that I had not seen before or didn't frequently see. And during breaks, they would go out and they would talk to as many people as they could and sign autographs and take pictures with them, and then come back in and continue the
Yeah.
conversation with me. And then afterwards, they spent another 20 minutes or a half hour making sure they spoke with everybody. They were lovely. And Suzanne Summers, that hit hard because it's not only someone that you would have watched watched on TV for many years, but for me, it hit home in that she was just this super nice person that
Yes.
looked at you and felt like you were the only person in the room. And you don't always get that. with people
No,
that
you
are of a
don't.
higher
No, you don't.
profile.
As a matter of fact, somebody once said, don't wish to meet your favorite person ever because you may be disappointed. And sadly, most of the time you're not, but at times you are. And it's a real kick in the gut.
Yeah, it is. It can
But
be.
let me talk to you. Your podcast, when you first released it back, and I guess it's been about what, half a year maybe, something like
Ish.
that?
Yeah, I think April. I think we go back to April
Okay.
for that. Yeah.
I thought to myself, well, this is a fascinating concept because I mean, there's podcasts being released by the handfuls every hour, and there's not much difference between many of them. I mean, if you're in the mystery genre, you're in the mystery genre, in sports or entertainment or whatever it is, macrame. But this was something I'd never heard of before. Remembering people and events. Did it first start off? Was remembering going to be just about people that we've lost, or was it always going to be a combination of people and events that have occurred?
I think it quickly went. The idea went from remembering those who passed to I didn't want it. Well, I didn't want to create a podcast like you mentioned, Suzanne Summers passing away. I didn't want to be the one that everybody looked to all of a sudden I had to turn around a show and stream it and have it available with somebody of real value that can remember Suzanne Summers at the blink of an eye. I didn't want to be an obituary. I didn't want to be that
Yeah.
person. So, I also wanted it to be a place where you can go and smile and remember somebody. Okay, it might be sad in that person isn't around anymore, but that person made you smile. And I thought, well, it didn't have to be just people. It could be things. It could be years. It could be events. So, and I also wanted to talk with people that are still around about these great things that they did as well, that touched us all. I wanted to be able to do that. I didn't want to have to wait for them to die so that I could talk to
Yeah.
their best pal about it. So
No.
I thought I thought I would broaden it, and I didn't want it to be something sad. I didn't want it to be an obituary. I wanted to be, hey, remember so and so, or remember that happened, and smile as you're doing it. So and in doing that, I wanted to create something that I would want to go and listen to.
Sometimes, the concept of death and going to a funeral, for example, and passing on your condolences to someone is always an awkward thing because you never really know what to say. You never know what people are going to say back to you. And the whole thing, it's just awkward. And it's just, you don't want to do it. And I thought to myself, well, do I want to turn on a podcast and listen to somebody talking about their late husband or their late wife? And then for people who are a little bit hesitant because they're afraid it might be kind of awkward, I suggest they check out the conversation that you had with John Ritter's widow, Amy Yazbek,
Oh yeah.
because she is so up and positive about her memories with John that she immediately, and you as well as a great host, put everybody at ease. And it makes that whole concept of talking about death easier.
Yeah, I'm not uncomfortable with that. Like when somebody passes away or somebody is fired or somebody is getting a divorce, I'll seek people out. I'll seek them out. And it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be much. It just has to be with an understanding of, hey, I'm here, or maybe I've been through it. And if you need anything, let me know. I like to do
Right.
that with people. And I think they would go and appreciate that. And so people pass away. It happens. And I think that people are flattered to be talking about people that they've lost. I don't think they get
Sure.
many opportunities. And so I look at it as more of a positive. It doesn't have to be awkward.
No.
These things happen. And, in the case of John Ritter and in his passing, Amy started a foundation. She started the John Ritter Foundation because he had a heart issue that he didn't even know about, that a lot of people would not know about, and they could be walking around with that. So she started a foundation to raise awareness of what happened with John. So when you skew the focus a little bit to, we want to raise awareness to John's story, and this is another way of doing it, then she's happy to talk about him beyond his memory, but also because of what ended up happening to him, because she wants to help save people's lives. So
Yeah.
in some cases, you have to think beyond the awkwardness because,
No, you're right. That's a very good point.
yeah,
I found it fascinating when she was talking about the fact that he had aspirations for a political career because he was inspired by I guess John F. Kennedy.
yeah, he,
And I thought,
boy, wouldn't he have been great, huh?
maybe too much of a nice guy.
Maybe, yeah, maybe politics wouldn't have wanted him, but
Yeah.
he would have been good for politics. I think he was the type of person that if whatever he wanted to do, he would have been able to do it with some
Yeah.
degree of success. And I think Amy relayed that very nicely in that
Yeah.
episode. That was a good one. And with Amy, I don't know her. I reached out to her cold. I went to the John Ritter Foundation. I said, hey, this is who I am. This is what I do Monday to Friday, but this is a thing I also do on the side. And it's a podcast called Remembering. And this is what I'm aiming to do. And I think about a week later or so, they got back to me and they said, yeah, we'll do it. And then when she got on the line with me, we were meeting for the first time. And she said, we checked you out and you seem like the real deal. And she had heard some other interviews that I did. And they said, no, he's all right. Like this guy's okay. You're not going to waste your time with him. And that's a big deal for me, Ted, because whoever I'm going to talk to, whoever a guest is going to be on my show, and even if it is a 10-minute thing talking about a tech report or something, but more so if it's going to be where you're joining me for a conversation where it's going to get really deep and personal, I don't want you to ever feel like I'm wasting your time.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing I could ever do for anybody that takes time out for me. I'm not going to waste their time.
Ted Wallachin returns in a moment.
Hey, it's Ted Wallachin for Tom's Place. Our fall merchandise is starting to arrive, and we've got massive amounts of summer clothing that needs to be cleared. Blowout prices on virtually everything, like designer suits, regularly up to $5.99, now from $167 to $267. Beautiful sports jackets, starting at only $167, and designer dress pants and shirts, all at $67. Check out our deals throughout the store on the very best of designer menswear. Huge savings off our already below retail prices. If you need a suit for an upcoming wedding or any special occasion, we are Toronto's one-stop suit shop. For the finest outfit for every occasion, there is no better time to find the perfect addition to your wardrobe. Tom's Place is open daily, 11 to 6 weekdays, 10 to 5 Saturday, and 12 to 5 on Sunday. Visit Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin in Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Now, you talk about the fact of remembering also deals with events in history, and you interviewed Mookie Wilson, who for a time played for the Blue Jays here in Toronto.
Yeah.
He was involved in a situation with Bill Buckner, who was a first baseman for the Red Sox, I believe,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And he was playing with the Mets.
Yeah,
and
Mookie was.
drilled an easy ground ball to Buckner during the playoffs. Was it during the World Series?
It was the World Series. It was Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. And, Ted, with that, it started out in remembering an event. And as I had done preparations for that conversation with Mookie, I thought this would be better to actually remember Bill Buckner. Let's remember the person and not remember the event. The event's been around since 1986.
Yeah.
I think we all know about the event, and
well, the ball goes through Buckner's legs. It looks like he's a kid in grade 4 playing first base.
Yeah, it was rough. It was a rough thing that had happened, and I thought I want to focus more on Buckner, and I want to focus more on their friendship, and that's what that episode ended up being about.
Yeah.
It ended up being about friendship. They became really good friends, and they had only met like once before that had happened. And then he told a great story, Mookie did, but a couple of years after. Like, Mookie hadn't seen Bill Buckner because at the time, if you were with an American League team, you don't face a National League team unless you meet in the World Series. And so Buckner was still he was still in the American League, and Mookie was still in the National League. And then he came to the Blue Jays, and they were both in the American League. And Mookie was out before a game, and he was stretching, and he saw Bill Buckner was there, and he knew Bill Buckner was going to be there, of course, because you know what team you're playing. And he thought, oh, geez, this is going to be awkward, because Mookie felt bad. He came out as a winner, and Buckner ended up being a GOAT, right?
Yeah.
And GOAT is taking on a different meaning. He's not looking like
I was just going to say, not that kind of GOAT.
Yeah. So
the 80s GOAT, not the 2000s.
Yeah,
GOAT.
exactly. So Mookie was like, oh, geez, how is this going to be, you know? And so he was on the ground and he was stretching, and then he saw someone hovering over him, and it was Bill Buckner. And Bill Buckner just looked at him and he said, hey, you want to hit some ground balls to me for practice? And they had a great laugh about that. They had a great laugh. And Bill, who was the GOAT in the situation, totally defused the entire nervousness of it all. And they became friends. They became lifelong friends. They went and did shows together, like autograph signings and everything. And it became this wonderful friendship through what could have been a terrible situation. And Buckner said, hey, this happened. This is a thing that happened. So let's make the best of it. Both of us, you know, it's all right. I've accepted it. And they became good friends out of it. And that was an episode that went from remembering an event to remembering a person to really being about a friendship that was really unlikely.
Yeah. Speaking of baseball, Jerry Howarth and Tom Cheek were a great tandem in the broadcast booth for the Toronto Blue Jays for years and years. Tom Cheek, unfortunately, was a victim of cancer and died at a young age. Jerry Howarth went on to continue his career until he retired a number of years ago. And you had him on your program talk about Tom, and he had terrific memories, and it's just such a deep respect for Tom Cheek, the broadcaster.
Yeah, that really was kind of a bucket list for me, Ted. I'll admit it. And with Jerry, you know, he stopped being on the air because of a health situation that would affect his voice. And he decided to bow out, and really he didn't do much media after that. Then I got him on Sirius XM. He wrote a book, and he came in, and we had a conversation there. Then I think afterwards, you know, some time had passed, and I asked him to come on. I don't know why, but I asked him to come on the show. And he said, you know what, Jeff, with all due respect, I'm going to pass because my voice doesn't hold up the way it used to. I've got to clear my throat and cough quite a bit. I'm a little bit wary of it, and I'm just going to pass this time, but thanks for asking. And he's always been a bit of a mentor to me throughout my career, passing along notes, you know, to me, sending me emails about what he may have heard and giving me some advice, which would really be helpful. And then I asked him to do this podcast, and I said, look, Jerry, I know you don't do things anymore. You don't like to come on and talk anymore. And that's fine. And if you got to say no here, go ahead. I said, but I wanted to dedicate an episode to Tom Cheek. So naturally, you're the first person I have to ask. And I hope you're the only person I have to ask, but you know, I've got to ask you. And if you've got to say no, it's okay. I understand. And he wrote me back and said, you know, for Tom, I'll do it. I'll do it to honor Tom's memory because I think it's important, and I'm glad you're doing it. And we did that episode, and it really did mean a lot because I never really had a conversation for that long with Jerry about Tom and about the two of them being in the booth and the care that they had for each other. They had a very professional relationship. They were kind to one another, but they didn't hang out a ton. You know, no. After games, Jerry would go back to the hotel room. Tom may have gotten a post-game drink with somebody, but Jerry, you know, liked to go in his hotel room and work on notes for the next day, you know, get a good night's sleep. You know, Tom didn't as much, but Jerry talked about sharing the mic at pivotal moments through success, but also when Tom's health was waning. You know, like we talk about the 93 home run with Joe Carter or the Blue Jays winning the World Series for the first time in 92. But a moment, and we talked about those moments, but one moment we talked about was in Tampa Bay, and Tom was living in Florida at the time, and he hadn't been on the air for a little while, and he was well into his illness. And it was shortly before he passed away that he came and visited Jerry, and at the time his broadcast partner Warren Saku, and visited them in the booth in Tampa. And it was at the beginning of the year, and the Blue Jays couldn't hit a beach ball at the time. They couldn't score, they couldn't hit anything, right? And they were in a real rut. And Tom came and visited and spoke to Jerry and Warren during a break, and Jerry said, "Why don't you call half an inning? Jump in and call half an inning." And Tom did. And Jerry tells the story way better on the episode of the podcast. But the Blue Jays started hitting. They started hitting and they started scoring. And it was wonderful. And you could hear in Tom's voice the thrill of getting to do this once again. And Jerry and Warren were really touched by it. I mean, I'm choked up just talking about it.
Yeah.
And it would be the last time Tom was on the air. And Jerry gave him that gift. It was a spur of the moment. He shared the mic with him. It was wonderful.
Are the episodes when they're a tribute to someone? Is that always one person's memories of someone else, or on occasion do you reach out and grab maybe 2 or 3 people who knew that person well?
Sometimes I've grabbed a few people. There was on one occasion, it was episode 13 where I wanted to talk about the television show Gilmore Girls. They have such a huge fan base, and I've gotten to know a lot of the people on the show and the fan base as well. And so I invited a bunch of people from the show, Liz Torres included, a legend. So I had a few people on to talk about that show. And then in one case, I had one guest on to remember 2 different people. It was episode 12. I had Ruta Lee on, a legend in her own right in Hollywood. She was in 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. Ted, I've been watching that
Wow.
movie since I was a kid. My dad loved that movie. And to think that I'm talking to somebody that's in 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. I just talked to her actually the other day. She's going to do another episode. And she remembered, because she was good friends with Debbie Reynolds, best friends with Debbie Reynolds. She
Really?
remembered Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher. So I kind of got a 2-for-1 on that one with Ruta. And I'll keep calling on her because she knows so many people. So sometimes I get a few people recalling one thing or remembering one thing. And sometimes I get one person remembering a couple of people in the form of Ruta Lee with Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher.
Because I think of someone that you interviewed as well. I mean, just about everybody that you've interviewed, there are a number of people who knew them well and could add to your. But I understand where you're coming from. But let's talk about the late Gord Downey and his wife Kaya Usher.
Yeah, that was the first episode, and I wanted the first episode to really hit home, and I really wanted it to be a meaningful conversation. And without sounding morbid or awful, I didn't want it to be somebody that passed away 30 years ago. I wanted it to still kind of be fresh. And I wanted it to be someone that universally you would say, "Oh, I remember him," or "I remember her." And I thought Gord Downey was a great fit. And I had Kaya Usher on my Sirius XM show before. She was promoting something that she had done on her own. And I asked her if she would do an episode to remember Gord Downey to kick off this podcast. And I was so flattered that she said yes. She was very complimentary. She didn't say yes lightly. And she did it. And she told some wonderful stories about Gord Downey. And, we know him as a musician and a brilliant songwriter. We know him as the Tragically Hip's Gord Downey and as the solo artist Gord Downey. But I wanted to hear about what he was like as a father, and what he was like as a husband. And she was great. And obviously sharing that. So I of all the episodes, I thought that was a perfect first episode for this podcast. I wouldn't have swapped out anybody else for that.
And Jeff, when people look back on previous episodes and they look and say, "Oh, he's got one here for John Lennon."
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about choosing Bob Gruen?
Because he was a good friend of John, and he, again, I had spoken with him before.
But the average person wouldn't know who Bob Gruen is.
No, but you know what? I think that's part of it. I think every once in a while you can grab somebody and go,
yeah,
this is a person that knew someone greatly and that had a profound impact on this person. So, in a way, I think it's a bit of an introduction to who that person was as well, and the effect that that person would have had. And I think you're gonna get something out of that person that's gonna bring a different perspective to who John Lennon was. This
Mhm.
wasn't somebody that knew John Lennon the Beatle. He knew John Lennon post Beatles. He knew the New York John Lennon, the John and Yoko John Lennon that lived in New York. And he spoke so profoundly about what it was like when John Lennon passed away. He could still speak to how Yoko Ono is doing right now because he's still friends with her. So um as a photographer, I think he was his friend and his photographer, and I that relationship as well. I think there's a vulnerability as someone that can be the subject of a photographer that's evident. There's a clear sight of that subject in being a photographer. And I thought, as both a photographer and as a friend, Bob Gruen captured John Lennon really well, and he shared that in the episode.
Yeah, good stuff. Who you got coming up in the future?
Well, Ruta Lee is coming back. And I don't know at the time of when this podcast airs, if this episode will be out already, but Ruta Lee is going to be remembering another good friend of hers, Alex Trebek, whom I'm sure you've gotten to speak with on
I worked with
occasion.
Alex Trebek a few years ago. I was one of the writers in the NHL awards for about 9 years, and we used to rotate hosts. 1 year it was Alex Trebek, and the next year it was Alan Thicke.
Oh, Alan Thicke. Oh, wow.
So it would be Alex
Yeah.
Trebek 1 year,
Yeah.
Alan Thicke the next year. Trebek Thicke.
So you would have gotten to know both of them very well, and
well, I wouldn't say very well, but I got to know them. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and Ruta remembered Alex Trebek, so that's an episode that is coming up. Funny about Alex Trebek. Well, funny, like this really speaks to the kind of person he was. So he married, got divorced, and remarried. His first wife, they stayed such good friends, Ted, that when she remarried, he walked her up the aisle. I mean, it's unheard of to hear of a person that is that well liked. So Ruta Lee talks a little bit about that. I'm going to be doing an episode on Mr. Dress Up Ernie Coombs, and I'm going to be speaking with his daughter, Kathy Lafort. And I've got an episode coming up, and this was especially touching to me because I was a big fan of the New York Islanders growing up and a big fan of Mike Bossy. And for me, like the Lennon and McCartney of a 1-2 punch that could score in the NHL was Mike Bossy and Brian Trottier. And I talked to Brian Trottier about Mike Bossy, and it got heavy. It got really heavy. And that is still something that is a loss that is still fresh. And, I wanted to talk about their friendship and what it was like off the ice. We talked about on the ice, but I wanted to know what it was like for the two of them off the ice. And for me, growing up watching Mike Bossy and Brian Trottier and winning all those Stanley Cups, it really meant a lot to be able to sit down with Brian Trottier.
And of course, all the past episodes are available, and you can get your podcast, Remembering, pretty much anywhere you pick up podcasts. Is there a website that you could direct people to?
Yes, rememberingpodcast.com as well, if you want to go and listen there, if you don't want to go to your favorite podcast platform. So it's all available there. And I tried to make rememberingpodcast.com almost as good as your site, Ted. And it was almost there. It was almost there. Your site actually was a bit of a blueprint for me because I thought, hey, I think we actually
we use the same company, I think, for the website. So Canada Now with your host Jeff Sammut can be heard on Sirius XM channel 167 Monday through Friday from 1 till 3 p.m.
Yeah.
And then the podcast is available, and who knows, maybe a book down the road or a movie. Who knows?
I would love that. I'm open to anything if anybody wants to hand me a check.
So basically you're a slut.
I will whore myself out for whatever you need.
Excellent. You're my kind of guy, Jeff Sammut. Thanks very much for taking the time. Thanks very much, man. It's been a real pleasure.
Ted, it was an honor. Thank you so much.
So then we'll see you next week. And once again, go to www.tedwallison.ca for our past episodes and leave your comments, and we welcome them. And we hope that you'll join us again next week. In the meantime, while you're online, don't forget to fill out your organ and tissue donation cards. You could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin Podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. The Ted Wallachin Podcast is produced by me, Becky Coles. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more information on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwallachin.ca.